Yeah, thank you all for joining. I'm really excited to be hosting Merijn today. Dr. Bruijnes, correct me, Merijn, is an assistant professor at Utrecht University. University, like many in the Netherlands, is quite well known for a very strong function in governance, and particularly in digital governance and the intersection of technology and the way that we administer our societies. I'm incredibly excited to be welcoming Merijn today because Merijn and I met last year at a conference on public administration, IRSPM, and we agreed on something, which is that there is a dire need for a little bit more technopositivism in the way that especially academics consider how emerging technologies, especially artificial intelligence, can impact, may, and also ultimately normatively should impact the way our governments run. Academia seems very, very quick to think about the risks to legitimacy, to fairness, to sovereignty, and so on. And these risks are important and they need discussing, but they need to be weighed against the way that that these same technologies might be able to make our governments better at delivering the kinds of things we want from them, more efficient, more transparent, and so on. Merijn, I think, is going to be making some of these points today in a talk that is going to be motivated by work he did with the Dutch police. I think I won't say much more and let Merijn do the rest of the talking himself. As always in these colloquia, we're going to be doing about 20 to 30 minutes of talk and then 20 to 30 minutes of Q&A. So feel free to either pop your questions in the chat as they come up if you don't want to ask them, or afterwards ask them live in the second half of the session. Cool. This session is being recorded, so please note that if you have your camera on, there is a chance that you will appear in the recording. And I think that's the last thing I'll say. Merijn, we're really excited to have you, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. So, yeah, it was an interesting talk we had in Bologna, I think it was, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I presented this work, but maybe I did. So I'm developing this work, and the argument for this work is there. The empirical work underlying it is still under development, and then the synthesis of these empirical findings, of course, is still a bit removed. So I won't be talking too much about this, but it is nice to have a framing for some of the earlier work that I'm doing where these things were already in the back of my mind. So I started this work, and it's a perspective title, and I call it "What AI Utopias Await: Exploring the Possibilities of Artificial Intelligence in the Public Sector as a Techno-Optimist." And also there's a long list of acknowledgements, because I always front load them because I tend to forget that, and it's very important because it's clearly not just me. So there's many other people that I'm working with, collaborating with, and whose work I'm using, including students. So it's very important to mention that for me. So yeah, so what's the starting point? So for me, the starting point, the why techno-optimism is important, could well be, it's a personal story, this speech that you might know by John F. Kennedy in the 60s, the moon speech. So we choose to go to the moon in this decade, and not because it is easy, but because it is hard, and because this goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. So what he's doing in this speech, I think very nicely, is reframing this impossible task of going to the moon. And that was the area of science fiction, and reorganizing, reframing that into a technological and organizational optimism of sorts. And we know the outcome. It's the landings happened, and it was a really transformative event. Not only the speech, but also this way of framing this impossibility. And somewhere in my mind, this rhymes with what we face now in our current time, this transformative event of AI. So the premise is this rise of generative AI. It's the most popular now. And as Chris was already explaining to you a little bit, as this very dominant, negative, pessimistic, you might even call it, academic discourse. We're very good at mentioning all the things that are potentially going wrong, all the risks, studying all the things that did go wrong in the past, etc. And that is very important work. So don't get me wrong, it is not something we should stop doing, but it's very important that we should definitely continue doing that. But it is not the only thing we should do. Because what we also can observe is that we're on this path of let's call them the Silicon Valley tech bros. They have this particular frame of reference for this normative frame of what the technology should look like and what it should do in society, etc. And they're not really listening to what we're saying as academics. Oh, this can go wrong, because that doesn't really fit in their narrative. It doesn't fit in their understanding of the world. So they don't necessarily even understand us if they would be reading us. And on the other hand, we're also seeing lots of, it's a hype. So we see many people, many organizations trying to use AI. They want to do something with AI, but they're also struggling. And we're not helping them with this negative. So we're saying, it's not like this, but how then, they ask. So they're following this path of the tech bros because at least these people are saying this is a way forward to do it. So my argument is that we need a counter, an alternative, positive academic view. And one way to do that is to foster this imagination of a better future, and that we have something to work towards. So that's the link with the Kennedy Moon speech. So making it even more personal. So my personal starting point in this and in the interest in these types of things is when I was sitting as a kid on the lap of my dad, watching science fiction. We used to like Star Trek. And we were watching this, and we saw this magical technology that didn't exist in real life, and it made all kinds of things possible that were not possible in our current situation back then, at least. So it had an impact on the social structures, on the way we organize ourselves, and it was for good. Star Trek is a very optimistic view of the world. And then I realized. I now realize that many of these technologies that I looked up to from the comfort of my dad's chair, these technologies are now real, and it's good to sometimes reflect and stop for a moment and reflect about these magical things that are now possible. And we also see that they really change the world, right? So we have now these flip phones and touch screens and earpieces and tablets, and they're so simple even my kids can use them. So back then it was just magic, and now as a scientist, yeah, good point. It's not just the world; it's also the galaxy. So now, as a scientist, I'm reading literature and I'm learning some of the words that might actually better explain what resonated with me when I was a kid. And one of these words is the socio-technical imaginaries. So these are collectively held, institutionally stabilized, publicly performed visions of a desirable future, animated by a shared understanding of the forms of social life and social order attainable through and supportive of advances in technology. So this technology and these structures are influencing each other. So this is all very nice and very abstract. And well, I also studied as an engineer, and then I like to make stuff, and it needs to be very concrete and down to earth. So sometimes I'm struggling with this abstraction that we as PA scholars are dealing with very often. So I try to combine those things. On the one hand, this abstract vision of the future, what could be, and then ground it in real technical implementation. So my approach, very broadly over all my studies, might be something like this. So what can we learn from this techno-optimism imagination of AI? What are the things that are the lessons that it teaches us? What can we learn from envisioning public value creation by incorporating AI in society? So kind of taking those lenses and see what we can observe and what we can actually design ourselves. So we employ this design thinking methodology very often, where you try to understand the problem and then design solutions for them, taking into account the considerations and the constraints that you find important. And I do this very often in education. So if you're a student of mine, then you sometimes get a task and think this is impossible. It is, and then we try to figure out how we can make it possible. So we try to do this in very small scale, real world developments. And lately I'm using that mostly on large language models to see what we can actually design for and then learn from that. So you might say that this is a multi-case study design. So some examples here, and I'll be talking more about AI in law enforcement in a bit, but to give an idea of where this might go and the breadth that I'm looking at. So one of the projects is called PlaySafe, and it's an AI role play for safeguarding officers in sports clubs. So in the Netherlands, all sport clubs, volunteer sport clubs, they need to have a safeguarding officer for social security, social safety, and that's usually a volunteer. So it's someone who put up their finger, maybe a mom or dad, and saying, yeah, okay, I'll do that task. And then we asked this volunteer to have very difficult conversations with people that had some sort of terrible experience. And that can be from being bullied or being left out or not selected in a team to rape and abuse. And that is something that's quite difficult. So we say, can we use AI in a way that supports these people in that human connection? So as a volunteer, as a safeguarding officer, you might feel insecure about your abilities, and then you can try this particular conversation that's coming up in a role play to kind of train yourself in trauma-sensitive interviewing and trying to feel better and have more efficacy and trust in your own capabilities and learn from this as well and prepare yourself. So there's one way of dealing using AI in a way that adds public value. Other examples include assessing the quality of government with AI, so helping people determine what the quality of government is. And we have all kinds of reports that are very thick and thorough, written by PA scholars, and then you have this massive document, and then citizens are not going to read that. So maybe we can use AI to kind of make summaries or contextualize the findings in these reports to the specific citizens. A third one might be a democratic innovation using AI. So it's another project that we're working on or we're trying to get funding for. So it's the idea to kind of connect citizens with public representatives, either through using AI to explain the decisions by these representatives, or help the citizens formulate complaints or constraints they would like to have on this policy, influence it. So it's kind of an empowering tool where citizens who might not otherwise be able to participate in this process are now helped in this process and then can come with their complaints and actually voice them. And here we're also thinking of the other side because, well, if everybody all of a sudden can very easily have a chatbot file all their complaints, then the public service professionals are going to be very angry with us and be overwhelmed with the work. So we can also think of it in a different way, where we use AI to kind of cluster these complaints together so that you can kind of get pre-clustered groups that you have the concerns that you're interested in, and you can then look through them if you're willing to engage with one of these types of concerns. And then AI in law enforcement, which I will be talking more about next. So there's many more of these studies and these case studies that I'm studying and interested in. And this is also an open call to anyone who is willing to collaborate on this, on what I call AI for good. So not forever, but for public value creation in the public sector. So that's kind of the context of the work that I'm trying to do. And it's also the starting point of this talk, because that's where we Chris and I met and had our engaging conversation. Now we'd like to dive more into the work that I've been doing with the police. And this is predating the thoughts that I have just shared with you before. So it's sometimes slightly differently worded, but the underlying principles and interests are still there. So this paper is called Explainable AI is no silver bullet. Towards a contextual understanding of appropriate reliance on AI in law enforcement. And I'll explain each of these words throughout the rest of this talk, and then it should be clear, I hope. And this is done with collaborators Stefan Grimmelinghuizen and from our department, and Marcel Robert, who is a PhD student, or actually he's now a doctor at the computer science department, and he is also working for the police. So starting these types of talks about AI, even though I didn't do that before, but I'll do it now. It's very good to define what we actually mean with AI, because it is a term that doesn't mean anything without definition. It's a container term. Anything can go in there. And this is the type of AI that we're working with. And we see that everybody is using AI in practice already. So everybody thinks currently of ChatGPT type systems when we talk about AI as the first thing that comes to mind. But there's also other systems that you probably have used in the past and are currently, and that are also AI. So if you have a Snapchat filter or Instagram filter that changes your face, I don't know, make cute puppy ears or something, or a nose, or whatever, that's also AI. If you're writing a paper and you have Grammarly, for instance, but also Word is using this now and suggests changes to the structure of your sentences, that's also AI. So all these things are AI, and we all use it. So it is being used in practice. So what's underlying these systems is machine learning. And I won't go into detail what that is. I assume that is knowledge that you all have. If not, then we can talk about that later. So this AI hype in the police practice, there's also some examples there. It's also being used, and sometimes already it's been stopped. So this is an example called crime anticipation system. And the idea was that based on police reports from the past and all kinds of data you have from neighborhoods in your city, you can try to predict where the next crimes will be happening, most likely, and then you will use that to inform where your patrols will be organized. It's kind of trying to predict crime. A very Minority Report. This is quite a few years ago already. It was a nice idea, and we didn't really think this through. Now there was a very critical report, and it's been stopped. So the police is no longer using this, but it was something that was being used. Another system that is more recent and that is still in active use is called Monocam, and it's a camera system that automatically that takes pictures from drivers and tries to determine automatically through machine learning, through computer vision, whether or not they're holding a phone in their hand. So basically doing no hands-free calling, right? And that's forbidden by law, at least in the Netherlands. And this system does that automatically. So there is many cars passing by, and only the cars where the system thinks someone is using a phone in their hand, it gets sent to the operator, and then they can make a decision whether or not this is actually the case. So in this study, so as a background, we see that AI is being used in the police. So in this study, we take this human perspective. So we're focusing on this street-level bureaucrat, this person working for the police, or screen-level bureaucrat, as some might call it. They are trusting this AI to some extent, and they're using this AI advice in their work to inform either their own decisions, etc. So what we're trying to problematize in this study is, from our literature study here, is so very often explainable artificial intelligence, which I'll explain next. It helps it explains what the AI is doing, why it is doing that, and therefore the user will trust this system more and use it more. That's kind of the notion that you get from the literature, and this is very much from computing science literature. So the designers of these systems, they view this trust, etc., in the way of placing their AI system in an organization like that. So if we get people to trust it, they'll use our system more. And we say that's not really the right approach. We say it should be appropriate reliance, so appropriate trust or reliance, we say. So what is that? That is very simple. It's not always rejected, because then you're under-relying it. So think of very stigmatizing the old grandpa who doesn't trust computers, so whatever they'll be presented with, they'll just ignore it. Doesn't make any sense to them. Or not always accept it blindly. So that's over-reliance. So you have to be somewhere in the middle, and that is appropriate reliance. Sometimes this machine is right, and then you should follow it, otherwise you shouldn't. But then the question becomes, what actually determines this appropriate reliance on AI advice? So I promised to explain a little bit more about explainable artificial intelligence. So there's many types of this. So firstly, we have this black box, opaque. That's the system. You have no idea why it's doing what it's doing. It's just some sort of result coming out. And then you move to a more interpretable. And it might be, let's say, a certainty score. So the system is 60% sure that its advice was correct. It's interpretable. You could do something if you're a specialist, but it's very difficult. Then moving to more understandable. So it uses human language to kind of explain what it's trying to do. So maybe I'm not very sure that I'm correct, would be better, it's more understandable. And then moving all the way to explainable, where it really says, okay, now you understand why and how I came up to this solution. And you can kind of look inside this black box that we all know. So there's two types of explanations that are relevant and should know about more globally. So how is this system in general working? It's very beneficial to see where you should apply it or not. And local. So that is in a particular decision, why did it make this decision, or why did it come to this conclusion? So then our research question becomes, well, what's the role of explainable artificial intelligence in appropriate reliance on AI advice? So a little bit more context, because I don't think everybody understands this, or maybe you do, then please bear with me, what this explainable AI actually might look like. And there's many examples. This is an image example. So let's say we have a classifier that's trying to understand what is on this image. So this image is a frog. And then we can divide this image up in many different parts and make little puzzle pieces, as you see in the middle. And then we have all combinations of these puzzle pieces presented to the model. And then we see when it doesn't understand and when it does understand that this is a frog. And then we see on the bottom right, we see what the conclusion is. So it uses the mouth of the frog to come to the conclusion, and not the red heart. So that's kind of the mechanism, one of the mechanisms that you could have underlying explainable artificial intelligence. So to make this more concrete, a little example here. So let's say that we have a system that can detect whether something is a wolf or a husky. So we see 6 images and we see what the system predicted. So wolf, and the true is actually it is a wolf. Then it predicted it's a husky. Then it is actually a husky, wolf, wolf. It predicted a wolf, but it is actually a husky, 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 wolf, wolf. So this system seems like it's doing relatively well, right? So it's 5 out of 6 is pretty good. So using this system, this method of explaining what it's using as a basis for its conclusion, for its prediction, we can use the same thing. So divide the picture up in many things and see where it changes it. And then we actually see this. So anybody wants to unmute and have a guess at what the system is actually using as a predictor?
I mean, I will if nobody else does. It looks like it's looking at the color of the ground a lot.
Exactly. So it's basically a predictor of whether or not it's snow or some sort of sand. And if it's snow, it's wolf, and if it's sand, it's a husky. So now we understand we should not use this system, right? So this explainable artificial intelligence, these ways of working with these models, can help us to understand why it makes decisions and whether or not we should trust those. Good. So we looked at the literature on artificial intelligence, explainable XAI, and it's not really conclusive. So we see basically 2 types of studies. These lab findings that are supposedly generalizable, and there we see that XAI often does lead to more trust in the AI system. But it's not always for better task performance, etc. And it's not really clear why, because, well, the tasks are different, etc. So you need the context to understand this finding, basically. And then we have the other area of research, which is in practice. And then it's not really generalizable because this context is very, very different. And then we see that actually this context is really determining the outcome. So whether or not XAI is actually influencing trust in a positive way. And one example that you might find interesting is a case study comparing the Netherlands and Germany in whether or not the police is actually accepting the AI advice. And what we see is that some of these stereotypes might hold true. So at least the stereotypes as they're being viewed in the Netherlands. I'm also curious how you view this. So in the Netherlands, we're We're very individualistic, very stubborn. So you see that this professional judgment of the screen level bureaucrat, that is the thing that kind of determines it. So if it matches my own judgment, then I'll follow the AI advice. Whereas in the German context, we see that there's some sort of institutional pressures, etc., moving for formalization of procedures. And then you see, you could condense this down into this cheeky quote saying, if the boss tells me to use it, I'll actually follow its advice. Looking at the scientific literature for appropriate reliance in the police context. So what is then actually correct AI advice? We actually notice that that is also not really clear, and it's difficult to do. So a correct choice for especially in the police context is something different from the correct eventual outcome. And some examples might be it can be correct to fine someone for driving too fast, but the correct eventual outcome would be it would be actually correct to escort this person because there is a woman giving birth in the back of the car, right? So it's you don't know that, so you'll find them, but the eventual outcome is different. And same for corrective measures. So a fine or an arrest might be correct in the initial context, but the eventual outcome will be determined in court. So there's varying degrees of correctness in this particular context of law enforcement. And that is also reflected, at least in the Netherlands, very strongly in this discretionary space that police professionals have. So that leads us to update our definition of appropriate reliance. It is to follow up on AI advice while critically evaluating the range of the advice decisions and considering their desirability in this specific situation that you're actually dealing with. And that means that we have an empirical research question here, which is how does explainable artificial intelligence influence appropriate reliance in the context of police practice? And the way we went about doing and collecting this data is, as I mentioned, I often use students for this. So we have 5 case studies, which are master thesis students who were embedded in the Netherlands National Police Lab for AI. And they have almost 500 people they interviewed or have some sort of thing. And there's a variety of methods that are being used. I won't go into too much detail for each case because you can read that in the paper, but I'll give you a few updates of some indication of what these types of systems might look like. And these are all fictional systems, just to be clear, right? So it is things that we thought up as researchers that might be true in the future or might be something that the police would investigate later. But these are all very much fictional. So 3 of these are on the left. It's an assessment of the danger of an arrest. So you try to approach someone based on their car license plate or whatever, or something you know about the address. You can get an idea of how dangerous this person is and how to prepare yourself. On the top right, it's an assessment of a victim. So is this a vulnerable victim, and might they fall prey to similar or the same thing they were a victim of? And then third at the bottom, it's also it's also published. Friso Selten published on this. It's predicting escape routes from people who are fleeing the police, and it gives suggestions on where to go. So these types of systems we've used and analyzed in all kinds of various using various methods, and we came up with this abstraction from these theses as the factors that are influencing appropriate reliance on AI. So we have on the left we have over reliance, appropriate reliance, under reliance, and then we have these factors, and it's variables, if you would say, contributing or inhibiting over reliance, appropriate, under reliance. And we distinguish 3 types of factors. So there's technology, task, and individual, and there's more. But these are the ones that are apparent in our data set. So the numbers here refer to the case study number. So it's not like the number of cases, but it's the particular number of a case study. So I won't go through all of them, but just to have an idea of what's going on. So one of the confusing ones might be, so if there's transparency of an AI advice, so if there's XAI present, it can contribute to over-reliance. And the mechanism there might be you actually get convinced by the system. It gives all the wrong reason and it's wrong. It will still be convincing because it gives all kinds of reasons. Might also inhibit over-reliance. So you now have, it gives you reasons why it came to a thing, so to a decision. So you might look at these reasons and think, this does not make sense. So you're not over-relying it. You're not accepting it when it's inappropriate. Let's see. So for another one is trust in AI, for example, is an individual factor. So if you are highly trusting this system, you are susceptible to over-relying. You trust it too much, so even if it's wrong, you might still trust it. Some other might be the workload of the professional. So if they're very busy, they might not use the AI system because they are just overwhelmed and they fall back to their ingrained methods. So this is all very confusing to us. So we try to make a model because, as one does, and this is not intended as like the truth of what such a model should look like, but more as a method of thinking of all these contextual factors. Because there's many, they might be different in a different domain. But the way we try to think about this and what we're trying to explain is, so you have some sort of decision space. You're moving through that, and each of these contextual factors is pushing you towards either over-relying, so accepting it, relying on it appropriately, so making determinations whether or not this is the right thing to do, or under-relying, rejecting it even if it was actually sensible advice. And so you can think of this as like a push and pull of all these factors. Some might be extending this decision space, and some might be contracting them. Some might be pushing them in one direction or the other. And all these factors together kind of influence where the decision actually falls. Are you using the advice from AI or not? And that is then also again removed from what the evaluation of this decision is. It can be that you were doing something that seemed sensible at the moment, but at a later moment, it's actually, in hindsight, it turned out to be under-reliant, because only then you figure out that this was incorrect advice. Right. So finalizing, contextual factors are crucial for appropriate reliance on AI. So we identified task, individual, and technology, and there are very likely many more. So thinking of, for instance, institutional, as we mentioned from the literature, where we did not see that in our empirical set. So explainable AI leads to more appropriate reliance on AI in general, because it has the ability to weigh, it gives you the ability to weigh AI advice on either correctness or the appropriateness in its context. However, the biggest risk we see is that you might be inappropriately convinced, and there is things that are making this worse. So if you have I'm doubting whether or not I'm saying this correct, but I think it's so the risk is low if you have a high efficacy. You're not easily convinced if you are very certain about your task, or if the task is very important. An important task you won't delegate to AI very often. And the risk of being inappropriately convinced is high when the workload is high, when the situation is uncertain, when there's hierarchy in play, etc. So all in all, coming back to the start of my talk, AI optimism might be possible, or feasible would be a better word, I would say. So AI can be used in law enforcement, but we should definitely study this more. But it gives us some hints, this study, I think, on that it can contribute to public value. And that's what I wanted to tell you. I'm very curious what you thought of all my jokes and the story in general.